the thing about every crisis, as bad and terrible as it is a huge opportunity for learning. Usually in a crisis, people show their true colors, the organization can show their weaknesses, and the other thing is that it's a huge opportunity for bonding. When you go through difficult things together as a team, and you and I have gone through many, I think you really build like a real bond together and you prepare for the next time.
This is Next Gen Builders, the show for tomorrow's growth and product leaders. And I'm your host, Francois Agenstadt. Today's episode is all about managing crises, because sometimes everything feels like a crisis. That email didn't have an attachment, or worse of all, you did a reply all to everyone, crisis. Other times, you're actually dealing with a real crisis. How do you deal with it? How do you move forward? How do you keep going? Well, today's guest is someone I've weathered many a crisis with, Adri Gil Miner. She's been the CMO at Artifact and Cumulo, the SVP of Brand and Communications at Tableau, and now she's the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Iterable. Welcome, Adri.
Hi, Francois. So good to see you.
So great to see you as well. Hey, before we start talking about technology and crisis, let's talk a little bit about your background. You don't have a typical background. You were a dancer, you were into art. Tell me a little bit about your history.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. It's, I don't think I don't know one person that has a straight, direct journey. I have had the wonderful experience to be born in Venezuela, and I'm from immigrant parents from Argentina. So I'm half Argentina or half Venezuelan. I say I'm just from South America in general. And yes, I come from a full techie family. Like everybody's an engineer or scientist. My uncle's a nuclear physicist. And I decided very early on that I really love the arts and humanities. So I studied art in primary, secondary school, then tried to be a writer. That didn't work out. I tried to be a dancer. That didn't work out. I did ballet for many years. And I sort of just landed really in the intersection of technology when the internet was really becoming a commercial and an economy driver, as well as with the ability to be a writer, a creator. And so I landed my first, corporate job was in marketing in a agency called Digitas. I actually joined them before they became Digitas. And my first job was new media analyst. And that was a data analyst role. It's just that the internet was new media considered then. And that's how I started. I got started, honestly, just doing like weekly reports and clicks. And I was on the affiliate program of one of our clients, American Express. And I very, very quickly learned that having a humanities background actually was very beneficial to me, because I didn't just see a bunch of data. I saw the story behind the data. I saw a proxy for human behavior. And I think with those lenses, it really allowed me to merge. And it was really the beginning of my career. And I still, 25 years later, I still use the same principle of combining the power of data with the power of story. And that's what distinguished me back then. And it led to my first promotion. And here we are.
That's amazing. And would you say that part of that history, in the arts, also prepared you for having to deal with many crises, business crises, people crises, technology crisis?
That is an interesting question. I think some of it, because I think in the arts, you tend to nurture maybe a different kind of thinking about it. It's a lot of problem solving, to be honest. That's what we think when you're choreographing or you're painting or you're drawing. It's really always a problem that you're trying to solve. But what I would say that actually prepared me the most was to be from a country where things weren't stable. When I was 13, 14 years old, I lived through my first coup d'etat. There were, lots of political unrest. And I remember when I was I think I was 19 or so, I went to do an internship. I worked in Germany for 3 months. And I remember such a big change of mind, because I realized that in Germany, you plan in sequence. It's a sequence in events, right? We want to get to X. So we're going to do A and then B and then C. And that's how you plan. And then I realized that in Venezuela, we never plan like that. We plan by scenarios, or we spend a lot more time discussing the outcome of what we want. The how we get there, sort of figure it out. There's a saying in Spanish is like, como vaya viniendo, vamos viendo, which means like, we'll do it as it comes, or we'll see as it comes, you know? And I think that has helped me, you know, sort of like that big cultural background of having a lot of flexibility. And, you know, when things are really unstable, you kind of have to be prepared for whatever comes, right? But as long as you're really clear on where you want to get to and what the outcome is, the how, you sort of like figure it out.
Yeah, it's true. And there's no straight path. It's not like you go from A to B. There's always something that happens. Now, we're going to talk about managing under pressure, about dealing with crises. But, you know, one of the things I've always appreciated about you seeing, like working through highs and lows through a career, is how you just always seem calm. Doesn't matter what kind of pressure you're under, whether it's your own, your team's, the business. It just seems like you're able to deal with it in a very calm and logical way. What's some advice that you have on like dealing with high pressure environments?
Yeah, that's funny you say that because it's so funny how, you know, we perceive ourselves versus others. I do think I have in the moment, I'm very, very calm, you know, and I think that what happens to me, and I share with a lot of people, is that when you have a crisis, the problem is very clear. It becomes extremely clear. And that clarity of focus, nothing else is important. You know, you just have to deal with this one thing. I think gives me a lot of, equanimity in the moment. I definitely have delayed reactions. You know, I often sort of, you know, after going through difficult things, typically will have a breakdown or some space to, you know, process the emotional stuff after the fact. And I've noticed that if I don't give myself that space, it's very hard for me to recover. And then, you know, sort of like my bank account of emotional strength is lower if you're going from back to back to back to crisis, right? But for sure, I think one of the things that I advise people and even my team, you know, like when you're going through, you know, and to your point earlier, a crisis can be defined in many different ways, but always having, first of all, you know, like spend time thinking, being clear about what problem we're trying to solve. You know, it is important to diagnose and spend time understanding the facts versus opinions and feelings. And that's usually what happens in a crisis. It's not one thing. It's like the combination of those things. And I think having a very high EQ is important in a crisis. Like it's not just about doing the right thing, but how you do it, with whom, you know, you have to have like really lean into your, I think, emotional intelligence to understand that, you know, typically in a crisis, there's a lot at stake, right? That is much more than just the facts, you know, like, you know, for example, if you had a product security risk, you know, or situation where you have to think that there are people in your company, you know, engineers or security that might be like the worst day of their career, you know? And so you have to think a little bit about that. It's sort of human aspect. And I think always connect in the human aspect first, because that can anchor. And then the next thing is that, you know, whatever actions you do, they need to be aligned with your values, the values of the company. So being very honest. I don't hide anything. You know, when there's a crisis, it's very important to be transparent into what's really going on, what you can do. And that's how you keep confidence. Because the most important thing when you're, for example, leading a response on anything is that you have to show people that you got it. You know, there's someone in charge. And that's the main thing that, you know, so show that and then build space for yourself. Like I said, I mean, some people might need it during the time, but people like me and many groups, like you need to give space for the emotions, whether they're happening at the time or they're happening after. That I think if you don't deal and don't create for that space, what happens is that you stay, you know, teams keep that. And then the next thing that happens, you're not just dealing with that crisis, but you're like retrograding back to like the crisis that you had before. So it is important to flush, to be like, okay, we're done with this. We're process we analyze, we make space for the emotions, and we're replenishing our energy to deal with whatever the next thing is. And so in in the tech world, for you and I, like there's so many situations, it's a roller coaster. Building a company is not a straight line. You go up and down and, you have a bad day, a good week, a great quarter, a bad quarter, like all of that thing. It is important to replenish because there's always something in the next week.
That's great advice. You talk about transparency, driving clarity, dealing with the emotional stress that comes with some of these high pressure situations. I mean, how do you think about the team in this vector? There's the team that's dealing with the crisis, but also the extended team. And, they may not all be at the same level of maturity or engagement. How do you create that cohesion and that calm while there is a lot of turbulence in, the next hours or days that follow that event?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I tend to practice is that this is going to sound bad, but in a moment of crisis, you have to switch to a more autocratic or militaristic approach. And that is not sustainable. But, most of us, I think, hope that manage our teams in a very democratic way, where you're asking different opinions and all this stuff. But when there is a moment of crisis, which should be defined and short, you have to have clear chain of command. And that's very important because you need people focused. You still need to bring input, but somebody needs to lead. And so, the best way to prepare, and typically, if any of you have been in business continuation plans or that sort of thing, we actually rehearse just like you would do in product. You actually rehearse, hey, who is the triage team? Who is the escalation team? Who is the decision maker? And there's usually a lead response, and it's very, very important that it's a one person, a single thread leader, to be able to, like you said, bring all the pieces together. In many times, especially when you have in a corporate, for example, you might need product and human resources and legal. You might have external people. It could be a lot of different parts. So again, the role of that response lead needs to be someone that has enough breadth of understanding of all the different pieces, can have that confidence building and can move fast and make decisions. And sometimes that person's not making decisions of their own, but they know who to put in a room, virtual room or in-person room, to make that decision. One other principle that's important is over communicate. Normally you should communicate a lot, but in a crisis it's super important to over communicate. It's super important to, it's speed, veracity of what's happening in communication. Those are the three principles that you work through it. And I do think it's important. A lot of people skip this step. Once it's done, it's super important to do a retro or, a postmortem, although I don't like that word. Retro sounds much better.
Word.
Yes, but it is important to learn because the thing about every crisis, as bad and terrible as it is a huge opportunity for learning. Usually in a crisis, people show their true colors. The organization can show their weaknesses. And the other thing is that it's a huge opportunity for bonding. When you go through difficult things together as a team, and you and I have gone through many, I think you really see, build a real bond together and you prepare for the next time. So having, again, that space, the retro, the analysis of what happened, what could have we done better, what are the lessons for next time? What can we do to prevent something like this next time? Which not always you can. Truly, you might have some things completely out of your control. But there are that is important because it puts the feeling of you're back in control, and that's the worst problem about a crisis is the feeling of this is out of my control or our control. That's the worst actually that, people emotionally go through.
It's true. Whenever there's a crisis, it is a learning opportunity, a learning moment, and a bonding moment. And as much as we don't want to be in those situations, the reality is that when you look backwards, it's a lot of those moments that you remember maybe most clearly, but actually creates these lifelong connections and relationships with folks.
Absolutely.
But you also bring up the idea of learning because there's a lot of situations we've never encountered before. And you and I have gone through a lot of these brand new experiences that you can't really plan for, but they happened. And I've heard you talk about the idea of a learning zone where there's the comfort zone and the growth zone. Tell us a little bit more about that and how do you go through these various zones and really kind of know where you are, know where to go forward.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring it up because, again, this, as you can tell, there's a lot of emotional stuff that you have to deal with. But, learning, if you think about it as a mindset of openness, and you can't be in a defensive mode, you can't be in a crisis mode to actually process what happens. So again, the thing about recognizing, you talk about teams, and of course, like grief is something that we all process very differently, and so all reactions are right. But I think it's important to, that's why it's important to recognize, like, when you're in an emotional zone, like I was saying, creating space, and sometimes that might involve crying or going for a drink, or hey, having some time to just joke around because like we all need different, or being by yourself and taking a day off and not going to the office. Like, there are many ways, but I think it's important to recognize that you need, people in a team need space to emotionally process what happened. And sometimes during the crisis, depending on how length it is, you might have to build space for that. And I like it to be structure, space for learning. Because again, what I was saying is, like, learning is also what you can control. When they say, like, hey, when everything is bad, like, focus on what you can control. Well, you may have not been able to control what happened. And, like, typically crises happen to us. We didn't go looking for them, so like they happen to us. We deal as best as we can. We react. And the learning zone, that's when it's like back in control. Because now we can take what was a bad experience and make it into a positive as much as we can. And really, I think growth not only an individual, but team growth. And people don't talk enough about that. Like, the thing about going through difficult things together is that, like I was saying, bonds. And like, all of us have a different way, like, you in a crisis are very different than you in normal state, like under stress. And so it's important to know what comes up for us in those different stages and how do we react as a team in different stages. Like, my communication style is very different when I'm in a crisis. I'm very short, succinct, direct, very commanding, very different than when I'm in, like, hey, in day to day, that's not my typical persona, but it's like, okay. And that shift, I want people to understand that that's not my normal stage. That's just my heightened crisis stage. So as a team, we need to learn to work. Again, like, that learning zone is so important. And it's past the emotions, it's past the difficulties, and now we're in a stage of openness again, and again, getting in control. So to me, I mean, I tend to be like a big writer, like extensively of I do that individually, but then I need to talk about it. Like, if I don't talk with my teammates, I'm like, hey, what just happened? What was that?
You're
And,
bottling all it in.
it's like unresolved, problem, or I don't want to call it trauma, but like, it's unresolved and it stays with me versus like, hey, we wrapped it up and now we can move on. And so that I think it's a really important step into just, while you're dealing with it.
Do you think, we always have these high pressure situations? Maybe it's like the positive of I'm trying to launch a new product. We have this big event coming up and, the product's not ready or the demo's falling apart. Do you approach those situations differently than the negative crisis?
I think so, but there's some shared principles just because, again, I think there's a huge difference of things you seek out. Like, we want to make the event and we want to showcase X in the demo, or even, it falls apart during the presentation. Like, or for example, the one time that we were doing a presentation in the pipes in the hotel, the water pipes broke and there was
I
water
forgot about that one.
everywhere. Yeah, that was fun. And so, things like that. Like there's a huge difference between like what you seek out and you set out to do and you want like a big goal that's gonna, versus like, wow, this thing happened unexpected and it happened to us. And then how do we react? However, I do think that there are some principles that are shared. For example, acting centered on your values. And when I say value, I mean like corporate values or team values or what you're trying to do. Being very clear about what the outcome is. So not the process, because I think, for example, a lot of those crises sort of like sought crisis, like require us to be agile. So that's the same as in a crisis when it happens to us, like as long as we're clear on the outcome, like we want to showcase, how we're going to go to the moon. And this is so important. Like, and we're all rallying. We're like, that's what we want as a team. We have that vision of what it looks like. So then nothing else is unacceptable. And then how we get there, that's flexible. Okay, maybe this demo didn't work, but could we do something else? Could we solve it another way? Could we iterate? What's not accepting is that we're still going to showcase how we're going to go to the moon, and so that to me is the same as when a crisis happens to us. Like we know what are we trying to solve and what the outcome is, how we get there is going to vary. And you have to nurture that team attitude. What I find the hardest, like with both types of crisis, is when people become so rigid that, well, no, but we agree we were going to do 1, 2, 3. And there's not acceptance, like, well, that's cool, but that's not viable anymore. And so I think we waste a lot of time when people are so stuck in the process and not what we're trying to do together. So that's a principle I'd share.
Yeah, and I think that flexibility is super important as you're building something. And, again, as builders, you don't necessarily know what's going to be in front of you. That's the beauty of innovation and invention is you creating a new path. So you have to be flexible because shit happens. You got to deal with it.
Totally. And one other thing that happens in both type of things that I've noticed, and I think a lot of leaders make mistake of, is that you put a lot of people, layers of management instead of going to the direct knowledge person. So I like to say, who's in charge of pressing the button? Like who presses the actual button? The email with the attachment? Who actually knows how to press? If you look in an organization, not everybody knows how to press a button or has the power. Your website goes down in a marketing team. There's like maybe, I don't know, like 10% of your organization that actually has access to your website, and knows how the website is built and all that stuff. In the product side, or when there's a crisis, like you have a problem with an office, like it's usually the employees that are directly there, not the, VP and the SVP and the director and all that stuff. And so I think that's one of the important things too about both types of crisis is like when you're trying to solve a problem urgently, you need to gather the direct, like the DRIs, the people that actually know and have the power and the access to solve directly on the ground, or in that, those people become the most important people in a crisis.
I want to get your thoughts on, the expression crisis is an opportunity or never waste a good crisis. Is that something you believe in? Is that something where, you think about the retros, what we could have done? Like, do you use that as an opportunity to drive the change that you want?
Yeah, I mean, I do strongly believe it, and partly is to my management and what I'm passionate about. I think learning organizations and growth organizations thrive in being really good at change. And it's human nature not to want to change. So, and when things are going well, it's very hard to make the case because the truth is like, no matter how much analysis and stuff, you don't know if the change is going to like be better. And one excellent example that I've heard is that in Singapore public transportation is amazing. They're like super on time. It's like ridiculously crazy, right? So
Incredible.
good. And some of my colleagues there have told me that it's super, super hard to make any changes to the system, and they're talking about like seconds of improvement, not like hours, like seconds of improvement because it's so good, and I think and I agree, the burden of, when it's good the next layer up is it's really hard. You have so much more risk. So when things happen, not so good, and you have really the openness, already whatever you're doing is not working. So that openness for me, as a person that is a change builder and I like to transform things, I like to, be in high growth organizations, to me is a tremendous opportunity and to drive change because your burden of proof is lower and you're open to testing and you're open to trying. So to me, it's like, I think if you see it only as a negative, you can just succumb to like the pressure and the negativity in this like circle versus, like seeing it as an opportunity and being like, okay, well, now we can test XYZ since this is not working. And again, to me, that's just so much more as a like I'm in control, with that attitude versus just like giving in into what's happening. It goes back to my whole background, like if you grow up in a country where you literally don't know what the currency is going to be tomorrow, you sort of have to like really become early on like very self-reliant, very like, well, I can trust myself to do this and I can trust the people around me to focus on what you can control. So hey, if something's not working, I say change it, try something else.
I agree. It's always an opportunity. Now, I'd like to kind of like take a lot of the examples you've given us, the best practices, and put it into the real world context. And I'd love to share, unfortunately, a tragedy that both you and I had to go through, where we were hosting a huge conference and bringing lots of people together. And unfortunately, there was a mass shooting in Las Vegas in the exact location where we were hosting our conference a week prior. I mean, that was horrific, but it was also incredibly difficult on the team, on our customers, on the community, on the events. Can you, as best as you can you walk us through it? And, how did you approach it? How do you deal with it? And how do you take something that was so negative, yet made it actually an opportunity to come together as a community and, serve each other?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely I would say is probably worst thing I've gone through in my career, and definitely wish it never had happened or to anybody. Unfortunately, mass shootings is something that we continue to suffer, in this country and sometimes beyond. So definitely the worst. And well, what happened was we a week before, like you said, there was mass shooting in this area. I got a call from our head of events at the time, who was like around 11 o'clock at night. And I found out that there's an active shooting. As
And
far
they
as
were there, right?
Yes, they were there because typically our team, a core team, will go even 2 weeks before, start site looking. And I mean, it takes a lot of setup when you have a 20,000 people conference, as you can imagine. And so, so immediately we activated. Just the first thing is like, we need to check that, our people are okay, both vendors and employees, like, are the people on the ground okay? So we did a call tree, which these are all protocols that we had set up. And then, after we had assessed that everybody was okay, of course, I immediately called our CMO, and, there were late night calls. The question became very quickly whether we would, continue with the conference. I mean, there were about 50 people that had died, and so it was a big question. We planned just for context, we planned these events with 3 to 4 years of cycle. So, like these things are not easy. And like I said, we have 15 to 20,000 people. So, our approach honestly was, again, what I said, like, first of all, there were a lot of like the first thing is safety. The second thing is, we definitely had to be very careful and in terms of like how we process all the emotions, over communicate. And one of the things that I think was very unique to Tableau and to all of us is and very true to who we were, was that we consulted with our community, to, should we do this? We consulted, of course, with the MGM staff, and within that, it was a very iterative approach. We discussed a lot of things, and one of the best ideas that I think, I wouldn't say like turn this into great, but at least gave us a sense of like we could help, because what could we do, was it actually came from the community, which was to raise money for the families of the victims. And because there's a lot of medical bills, there's a lot of things that happen, and so we that idea came from the community, and it became the rally cry of the event. We decided to go forth. We decided to actually go with a party as well, and we did move location, and but the whole thing became, and Vegas also had become this idea of like stronger together. So that actually became the theme of our event as well. So what I would say is like, I'm proud how we responded. I'm proud. It was one of the best events because I think the unity in the community that really came together, like, hey, we are here for this community, the Vegas community, for the MGM community, for the families. We care, and we care about this, and it's not just a corporate event. It's about bringing people together and standing together and not letting horrible things, destroy goodness that you're trying to do, So, I'm very proud of being part of that in the response. Definitely not by myself, but I think that, and all of the things that I talked to you about, having commanding voice, including people, making space for the emotions. And also we had lots, not one, but many, many posts, analysis and retros of not, what happened, how do we deal with it? Many, many internal policies and how do we deal with safety concerns came out of that experience that I think made us strongest as an organization. And I think as a community, as a brand, there was a lot of strength that came to it, So I remember the feeling, and for many of our community members customers that told us like, hey, this was such a great event because, again, the feeling of togetherness. So it was a feeling. It's not something that we could measure, but really was forefront. And it really showcased that Tableau was a community brand. We were driven and respected and defined by our customers. And I think, like I said, like in a time of crisis, it really showed the authenticity of the corporate values and who we are as a brand. I think that was to me like such a deep experience, So yeah, that's how I recall it. And hopefully we'll never face something like this again.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. It was a great event. It was a difficult situation. And I really appreciate the grace and thoughtfulness that everybody, participated in and approached it. And I actually think, it actually brought the humanity of all of us to the forefront. And we saw who rised up and was able to, move forward and actually lean into the opportunity.
Yeah.
Now, I have to say, we've had a pretty heavy discussion today. We're talking about crises, there's grit and perseverance. I mean, that sounds exhausting. How do you relax? How do you stay grounded? Do you watch like trash TV? Do you, go running and do sports? Like, what do you do?
Well, definitely. I would say like definitely it's an ongoing thing. For me, I think when appropriate, of course, it is important to have the sort of like joking and humor around. And sometimes you need that. Do you remember what I was saying about closing things? So to me, one big stress reliever is like you have to honor things, like Marie Kondo, like you have to honor things, good or bad. Everything comes to a close. You have to honor closing them. And sometimes like humor. I mean, I do love to joke around, banter. I think that's such an important part of like working together. And, good things, bad things, ridiculous things, like you're on stage and demo goes down. Like, I mean, at the moment, super stressful. After the fact, you can kind of laugh about it, like, but it is important to me, bringing that is part of my stress reliever. Like if I don't have that space, like I said, I'm not ready for the next thing. But another thing, like I said, I do write and reflect a lot, and I think that's important and talk about it. And then, yes, I do spend some time in nature, and hiking has become a really big thing. It's one of the beautiful things about living here in the Pacific Northwest is that we have so much nature around us. And I used to joke that hiking was just walking in the woods. And then lately, just in the post-pandemic times, I have picked up sea kayaking. And it's really become, yes, so much so. I'm actually taking a class this week. It's a 4-part class for rescuing and, current management and stuff. And it's become a really incredible just experience. I think there's the water, the peace, and it's such a recharge. So I do encourage, everybody. And, I'm definitely not young anymore. So to pick up something new to me, I don't know anything about kayaks. So it's like, this is brand new to me. And so, but to pick up something that gives you, there's like, I think joy and sort of peace in the most unexpected things, So, so I think it's important to seek it out and try things, because perhaps I also learned that things that don't work, that no longer work for me. I've never been like a big gym person. I tried, for example, when you were like the Peloton, I was part of the Peloton whole thing.
I got you very expensive paperweights.
Yes, a good clothing rack. It was so that just never worked for me. And I think like we have to be true to find stuff. I, of course, still dance. I actually have in Spotify a playlist that's called Stress Dance. And, it's a lot of salsa and stuff. It's like, and it just like, it helps me to move my body. Like I know I keep my stress in my body. And so for some other people, like the gym works, but for me, some like good salsa merengue and like, hey, let's just shake it and stuff. It literally helps me just kind of open up. And that is important. Like I said, I think the most important thing is that you find your thing. What's your thing, Francois, actually?
A lot of bubbly and wine. So champagne and wine works every time. And then I actually hate running, but I go running as a stress reliever because that's my way of just processing it. I hate the running process so much that by doing it, like nothing else matters because this moment is the worst moment ever. And doing that just kind of releases my stress.
Yeah. So doing something you really hate helps you with stress.
Exactly.
Psychology.
Kind of counterintuitive.
We need another half an hour to analyze and break this down.
Well, on that note, Adri, I want to thank you for joining us today. I appreciate you. I appreciate how you always challenge me, how I learn from you, and how you make every situation, no matter how big or small, just makes it a special moment. So thank you for being you.
Yes. And well, thank you for being my friend.
Of course. And thank you to all of you for listening to Next Gen Builders, and look out for our next episode wherever you get your podcasts. And please don't forget to subscribe.